Hey everyone.
Hello.
Hey, how goes it?
Ew, goes well. A little tired. I need to get some water. I'll be right back. Oops.
Who's Spotify?
I was wondering that too.
Play music, please. All right, how'd the homework go? Seemed like a few of you struggled a little bit with it, which is good.
Yes, I got it to work thanks to ChatGPT, but I still don't fully understand what exactly is going on, but a lot of trial and error got it to work.
Yep. Good. All right, so I think for today, I think we should, this stuff is pretty critical to understand, so I think we'll just go through the homework and then add on to it a little bit. Okay, let me uh,
I also use ChatGPT, and I think that might be part of what messed mine up because it started doing error handling before we were ready.
oh, nice.
Mine displayed, but it was displaying every time I do add to cart, it adds like 10 things in there.
Every time you did add to cart, it would add 10 things, you said?
Yeah, it will add 10 items at once. I don't know where they were coming from. Like it will add the whole list instead of adding like my specific uh menu item that I wanted.
Okay. Well, if after today you're not able to kind of spot the difference between yours and mine, then I would just post your code and someone can take a look at it. All right. Before we hop in though, let's just do some quick review. We talked about a concept in databases, an acronym in databases. Does anyone remember what the acronym was?
Is it CRUD?
Similar. Say that again.
CRUD?
Yes, CRUD. So CRUD, which is what? Oh,
Is it
it's gonna
create, read, update, delete?
Yeah, good. Okay, yeah. So you know, we are wanting to make more interactive, complicated websites, typically referred to as web apps, which are largely about managing data, and all complicated data actions like really boil down to these four things. So it's like the main things that databases need to support. And then there's the corresponding actions that an API will expose for the different verbs you can use to talk to the API through HTTP. And those kind of always correspond with CRUD. And then do you guys remember what those are? So for create, which HTTP verb is that?
Post.
Oh.
Good. And then read.
Get.
Good. Update.
It's kind of not fair. It's on the screen.
But and then delete's the best one because it's just the same. It's just delete. Okay. All right. So we have those different methods when you're creating data and updating data. Usually you're doing more than just hitting a particular endpoint or URL. You're also typically providing the data that you're trying to create or update. Then does anybody remember the name of the part of the, if we'll do like a post request and then we'll provide what? Anybody remember what that's called? Like to actually provide the data. What are we putting that in?
The body.
Yeah, so that'll be the body. So you'll see like when you're dealing with the backend code in Next.js, it'll be a request, like REQ, the parameter dot body. Yeah, and then so most of the time when you do a post or put, you'll have a body associated with it. And then delete. Most of the time for a delete, you really just need to provide an ID of what you're trying to delete. So that and also just so you know, like a GET request doesn't include a body in the request typically, like per the definition of the spec. You're not supposed to include a body. Like to describe what you want to get, you're supposed to do that through the URL parameters. But like no one's gonna arrest you if you included a body in a GET request. And like if you deleted data in response to a post request, like no one's gonna arrest you either. Like you certainly can. You can do whatever you want. You know, you're writing the code, but there's certain conventions and certain expectations that everybody has that you should try to follow. So, but there's certain things that are sort of up to you. So when you're writing your delete method and you want to delete stuff in the shopping cart, it's probably more common for people to just put the ID of the thing you're trying to delete in the URL and not include a body. But you certainly could include a body if you wanted to and put the like information of what you're trying to delete inside the body. It's up to you. Like you're writing the API, so you can have it. You can write whatever you want. But by convention, typically for delete, you just need to provide the ID where you're trying to delete in the URL. And then, you know, all of these endpoints will have some sort of URL associated with it, right? So when we're wanting to add something to the cart, that's usually, you know, we'll do, you know, /API/cart. If we're trying to get all the carts, that'll be typically get/carts as well. But whenever you're trying to update something, you typically, or delete something, it's usually going to include an ID. And so that might be like /cart/ID and then like put or delete. So there's two kinds of parameters. There's the URL parameters, which on a GET request kind of look like, so if we did like API /menu, if we want, and then so like this might get all menu items, but if we want a particular menu item, then you typically will see it where you put ID in the URL like this, where that's sort of like a parameter that will change. So like when you're writing it, you'll use this sort of colon syntax it depends on if it's for the front end or the back end, like how you actually hook this up, but so we'll see more of that. But you'll often see it kind of symbolized this way, where there's like colon and then the parameter name. But when someone's actually hitting it, it'll be like /API/menu/ like 1. And so like you would be capturing the ID they're asking for is ID 1. And then you would look for that particular item in the database. That's called a URL parameter because the parameter is like in the URL itself. You'll also see this concept of query options, where I'm sure you've seen it before, but you'll see this like at the end of the URL, you'll see a question mark like this. And then you'll see like this key value pair thing, like name chicken. I guess it's looking at the menu, so it's expecting food, I guess. But yeah, so you'll see this too in the URL. These are called query options, and you can have as many of these as you want. You'll see like, yeah, you'll see like multiple key value pairs potentially. And this is another thing where you can sort of decide if you're going to use URL parameters or query options or query parameters. But there is sort of an expectation that the URL parameter is like the actual like thing, the actual entity or item, and then the query options are sort of like additional minor adjustments to it. So to give you an example of that, if we go to Pitchfork, there's some way for me to keep this URL open all the time. So when we land on the root page of Pitchfork, it's just pitchfork.com, just the index or route of Pitchfork, right? But then if I navigate to this best new music page, then it just adds /best. And then if I go to best new albums, it then adds /best/albums, because they also have like best new tracks. So it's like there's like best and then albums or tracks. And so notice this is all URL parameters. So the way that they're writing their URL routes for their front end is like reviews /best, and then there's probably a parameter for, you know, type or whatever, and it's either like albums or tracks or reissues or whatever. Or they potentially have 3 routes for that. I'm not sure exactly how they set it up, but all that to say, like the item that we're trying to get is best new albums. But then if I like keep scrolling, eventually you'll see Carl. Carl. It's okay. So eventually we need to go to the next page. Can you guys hear that barking? And then, like can you guys hear him? Carl. So eventually though, we need to go to the next page. And so you can see like we're still looking at best new albums, but notice now we have this like question mark page equals 2 thing. And so like it's the same resource or same entity, but now we've added this like query parameter to slightly modify the results that we're getting. And so this is the front end route, but then most of the time, there's a pretty close resemblance between the routes on your front end and the routes on your back end. Doesn't have to be the same, but it often is going to be pretty similar. Like when you're writing your front end page and you're deciding to make a page that has, you know, the best new albums, then you're typically going to have an API route that exposes the best new albums for you. And so like you might as well keep the routing convention that you're using pretty similar. So you've got this front end URL that then is going to be making a request to the API to get the data. And so it could be potentially basically the same URL, but just having API at the beginning of it, if we were building this within Next.js. So this here is what's called like a search option or like a query parameter. I've kind of called it a bunch of different things. Because that's how I think of it. But I think there's probably a specific term. I hear people just call it query sometimes. Path parameters. Yeah, so path parameters and query parameters. And by the way, all of this, the like convention I'm referring to is what people call a RESTful API. You might hear that term sometimes, which is like you can read up about what makes a RESTful API, and it's just sort of like conventions and recommendations for what routes, like how you should name your routes whenever you're writing your API. And what's nice about that is because like if I write my internal API, it works a particular way, and then I might need to go use some other person's API, like Shopify's or Stripes or SendGrids for email or Twilio for text or like ChatGPT for prompting and stuff like that. All of them are going to be very like they all typically follow this RESTful way of writing APIs, and so like they all start to kind of feel the same, and you get kind of used to the way they work. So that's what's nice about everybody sort of writing their APIs the same, is that you kind of know what to expect whenever you're starting to integrate with somebody else for something. Okay, so we haven't seen quite yet how to hook up on both like in Next.js on the front end and the back end. We need to be able to support using path parameters and query parameters. So I'll show you guys how that works. We might not get through all of it today, but that's like an important thing to have in your toolkit to know how to set that up. Okay, any questions? Cool. All right, so I'm going to copy over where we left off from last time. Okay. So instead of making like a new project like we did last class where we used npx create next app and moving all the files and stuff like that, I just copied it. So we'll be starting off from where we left off. Okay. So either in like the VS Code terminal or in your own terminal, you need to navigate to wherever this project is. So I'll do that. So right now I'm in my curriculum folder, and then I need to move to module 5, day 3. And then I made it in the in-class folder, and then within that there's my copy shop folder. So I need to go all the way to that. So now my present working directory is copy shop. And then to actually start working on this, what command do I run?
npm run dev.
So if I don't have any other next projects running elsewhere, then it'll use localhost 3000. And then I can, if you hold down command, it'll like let you click on links, which is nice. Command for Mac and probably control for Windows. Okay, so here's where we left off. So we are landing on this index page, and like so the index page inside the pages folder, that's the we don't have any sort of folder they're nesting, and so that's the like root route. That's the index route. So whenever we go to localhost 3000, which is like the root of the page, similar to going to like pitchfork.com, then the index is what's going to be rendered. That's the component that's going to be put on the page. So that's this here, and we've got a use effect that runs on page load, which is what this code here is doing. And we are hitting our internal API by just saying fetch /API/menu, and then getting the JSON response from that. So in the body of the response will be our data, our JSON data, which is just an object or an array of objects. So once we get that data, then we are updating the state the variable that we declared up here that's going to hold all of our data. And then we loop through all of that with this map down here to make all those cards that we saw. So that's kind of our site so far. And then we've got this add to cart on click that's happening when you click the button. That is then sending an item to add to the cart. So we can see where we left off. Oh, look at that responsive site that I made. That's great. All right, so if we watch our network call, then we can see when I clicked on add to cart for flat white, we made a post request to /API/cart. That was a 200 OK response, which means it worked. And then we can look at our payload, which is like synonymous with the body. And we sent it this object with ID to quantity 1, right? And then I think we're responding. Oh yeah, we just respond with a message item added to cart, right? Okay, so first task is adding a new page that has that's going to show our cart, which you would probably get to by having some sort of like nav header at the top that has like the cart icon with how many items are in it. Okay, so first we need to make that page. So to make a page in Next.js, a front-end page that shows up at /cart, what do I need to do?
Create a new file.
I need to make a new file, and what's the file path need to be?
In Pages.
In Pages, yeah. And so I actually have two options here. I can just make a file called cart.js. That'll work. But if you ever need to make like nested routes or anything like that, like cart's probably not like a good example. Well, I don't know. We might like think about menu, for example. If we had like a different menu page and then we wanted to go to like a menu item. So you would need like multiple pages that are a part of this sort of like menu URL. Then you can do folders, for example. So we have two options. I can do the cart.js, or I can say, okay, I'm going to make a cart folder. If you land on just cart, then you're gonna do an index.js. So index.js is sort of just like, here's the main file for this particular folder. So the main file for the cart folder is what will get rendered if you just go to /cart. But then I can add another file called like, /cart/ check out maybe, like maybe I could go to my cart and I can see it, but then I can actually hit like check out now, which would take me into a flow of like my billing information for what's in my cart. And so now that I have this folder, I can then make more routes that start with cart. So I can do like checkout.js. So if I go to just /cart, index.js will load. If I go to /cart/checkout, checkout will load. So let me just show that real quick. So we'll do export default function cart. We'll return h1 cart just to see it work. And then for checkout, we'll do export default function checkout, return checkout. So now we can see we don't have any way to navigate to this quite yet within our application, but we can manually change the URL. Leave it, Carl. Carl. Let's go to the bedroom. Come on. Let's go. Come on. Okay, so we can manually change the URL and go to /cart. And we can see we're just getting just that one component, the one that's returning that heading. But then we can go to /cart/checkout. And we get the checkout component. So that's what this like file-based routing stuff is like. That's what it's all about, is like you can make as many folders and files as you want to make as much sort of URL based nesting that you need or routing that you need. And then it works the same for the API. So if we needed to make a /API/cart/checkout route, you just follow the same convention of making like a folder with the same file names and stuff. But you just do it inside the API folder instead of the pages folder. Well, I mean, the API folder is inside pages, but you know what I mean? Okay, so we don't actually need this checkout file, but I'll leave it there just for fun. So we just need our cart file. So whenever we load this cart page, we need to make a query to get the data that's in our cart. So we just follow, so this is what, the stuff I showed you to load stuff from the menu may have been a lot, but you just copy it over and over again. So to load data, to make a GET request from our API, on page load, which is often when you need to get data. So when you go to a page, you need to get data for that page. And so we often do that on load of the page. So basically, anytime you need data, you'll make a state variable that will hold it. And then you'll have a use effect that makes the call to the API and then puts the data that comes back from the API in that state variable, and you're done. And you just do that over and over again, that same exact pattern. So if we just do a little side by side here. So in this case, we don't want menu, we want cart or cart items or something like that, whatever we want to call it. So we copy the state variable over to the top of our component here. And we need to make sure to import that from React. We're also going to need the use effect as well. So I'll go ahead and do that now. Right. And so I also need to rename this to cart items and then set cart items. And this starts empty, like an empty array to start. Why am I choosing to do an empty array to start? It just makes the code a little bit easier. cart items is going to be an array of objects. And so like an empty version of an array of objects is just an array, an empty array, which then just makes the code a little bit easier. To manage because it's sort of the same type, basically the same sort of wrapping type. Okay, so we have our state variable to hold the data, and now we need to also add our use effect to get the data. And so we can leave this function called the same, load data, but instead of /API/menu, it's /cart. And then, you know, we wouldn't be setting the menu, we'd be setting cart items. And then that would be, I'm not sure, it might just be data. I'll have to look and see what comes back from the API. I can't remember if we put it inside an object or not, so we'll have to see. So we make this function and then we call the function. This is just sort of, this is kind of, you saw when I wrote this the other day, I didn't think to do this right away. This is kind of a funky syntax you have to do with use effect if you want to use an asynchronous function. So we're like defining an asynchronous function inside the body of this use effect and then immediately calling it, which is a little odd. But it just kind of makes this code here a little bit cleaner if we do it this way. Okay, so now I can see if this is working. So why does it think that this is not? There we go. So now we've got cart, and then we need to loop through and show the cart items just like we did for our menu items. And so, you know, we can kind of copy this code as well over. So let me grab that. And we can say here's our cart instead of menu. Use the same sort of styling. Instead of menu, we'll loop through cart items. And then we don't have the same properties. We just have ID and quantity. So we'll do item dot ID and then item dot quantity. And then we're not going to have a button quite yet for this. But it would make sense to have a remove from cart button. But let's just see if this stuff's working first. All right, so we'll go to cart. And it's not working because I wasn't sure exactly what the return payload was going to be. But you can find that out by either hitting the endpoint yourself, or you can look at the network tab if you want. So we can see that we eventually make a call to cart here in the network tab. I don't know how well you guys can see this. And then I can kind of preview the response here. So we did sort of nest it inside an object that has the cart key. So we didn't return just like an array of objects. We returned an object that had a key called cart that then has an array of objects. And that's up to us. I could go change the backend to just respond with the array of objects instead of the key cart. It's up to me, you know, so I could change that. Or we can just deal with it on the front end so that we're handling it correctly. There might be other keys that we might add eventually, which is kind of nice to have it in an object. We might have like cart items and then have like total items. Like we might just provide that as a property so that you have it. And then also we might have like total price or something like that as well. So that's kind of why I was putting it in an object to start. Okay, so that just means whenever we set cart items, we probably want to do data dot cart. Yeah, or whenever we do our map, we just need to do cart items dot cart dot map. And then we should be good to go. Okay, perfect. All right, so what mistake did I just make? So right now we're getting an error that cannot read properties of undefined on map. So I'm trying to do in my code cart items dot cart dot map, and dot cart, like this error, what this is saying is, hey, you're trying to call map, but cart is undefined. So there is no map method available on it. So what mistake am I making here?
We haven't declared a function for cart, or yeah.
So are you talking about like this here, or when you say function, you meant what sort of function are you thinking of?
I'm actually not sure. Never mind.
So remember, like our code is going to be in two states. There's going to be the initial load of the page, and then we're going to make the request for the data. So, but there's a moment where the page is rendering where we haven't received data back from the API quite yet. And that's what this sort of, this like default, this like, hey, I'm going to make a state variable and the starting value of it is this empty array. Well, so that's what it starts as, and then I change it. I update the value of that state variable once I get data back. But down here in my code, like when I'm trying to create the page, I'm saying cart items.cart, which cart item starts as an array, not as an object. And so that's why like an array doesn't have a cart property on it, which turns into undefined, and then I try to call map on undefined. So to fix this bug, I can either add like a loading state, which is what we sort of did on the menu page, or we can initialize this to something closer to what the response actually is, which is this object that has this cart property, but then to start, it'll be an empty array. So this should fix that error. It happens quickly, but there's a moment where the page is loaded, it's rendered no items, and then it gets the data back and then it shows them. Now, when you're developing locally, there's no latency because it's like talking over the internet, but to itself, like on the same computer. So you have to kind of think whenever you're developing, this is how it's working locally. But when this is actually deployed, there might be much more latency between getting those cart items when you're actually, talking over the internet over a longer distance. Okay, so here's our cart items showing up on the page. And remember we added like a bunch of duplicate items because we can just like click that button, and we weren't handling that on our backend. So we have like a bunch of the same item in the database. At least in my database. Yours probably didn't, because like like we have that local file that's storing everything. Okay, but we want to remove, what we want to try now is to add a button to remove an item from the cart. So for that, we're going to add a button down here. And that is not quite right. So on click, we will make a method called, yeah, remove from cart. So yeah, we add this button. If someone clicks on it, we're going to call this remove from cart method, which we haven't written yet. We're going to pass it the ID of the item they clicked on. That's what's happening here. And then we just name this button remove from cart, or we can just call it remove. Okay, so that method doesn't exist yet, so we need to define that method. So we do function remove from cart, which will take the ID as a parameter. Okay. Okay, and then here's where we get to see one example of using parameters. Okay, so we can either pass the ID in the body, or we can pass it as a parameter. It's up to us. But I think it would be more common for you to see people do it in the ID. So the method that we want to do here is fetch still, right? And we're going to go to /API/cart. But then we want to pass the ID in the URL of the thing that we want to delete. And so do you guys remember how to do like the template strings? So that I have the ID here. We can either do string concatenation or we can do like the template string stuff, which looks like this, where you do, instead of single quotes, you do these backticks, and then we put ID inside this $ curly brace thing. So that the endpoint that we're going to hit is going to be /API/cart/ and then 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever the ID is of the item that we're trying to delete. And then we simply need to update this method to be delete. So we haven't written this endpoint yet, but this is basically what it would look like. And so to delete this, we can await. Calling this. So hey, run this fetch call. So delete, and then here's the URL that has the ID of the thing I want to delete. Go do that, and then await that response. And then it will have been successfully deleted. So we can do that, and then we need to actually write this endpoint. So we'll go to our API, and then we have this cart.js file that has a get and a post. But we need to kind of move some things around because we want to have this cart get and post still, but we also want to have like /cart/ID that'll handle the delete. And so what we actually need to do is inside API, we need to now make a cart folder. And then we can choose, I think you can keep cart.js outside of it here, but most people will move it inside the cart folder and then rename it index.js. So this will still work. So the same endpoints will still work. You can still go to /API/cart and this will work. But now what we can do is make our parameter based endpoint. And the way you do that is this like special syntax based off the file name that tells it that you want to capture a parameter. And that looks like this like these like not brackets but square brackets, and then the name of the parameter, and then .js. I think it might be with a colon. I need to look that up again. Yeah, okay. I think I did that right. Okay. All right, so now we have /API/cart/ID, which will then be a dynamic route parameter. And then we also have our current index.js, which will just be /cart. So let's copy our handler over. And then we just want to handle at the moment just a delete. And then we'll just give a 404 for the other ones and say we only support delete requests. And then from our fake database that I made, we have a I have a delete method which takes the ID. Okay, so does anybody know how to get the parameter that is being passed to us?
Sorry, ask that again.
So we've set up this endpoint that is supposed to get this ID passed to it. So we have a route parameter. So if someone goes to /API/cart and then / like 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever it is, whatever ID they want to delete, this is the handler that will run. But inside this handler, we need to get access to the ID that they passed us from the route parameter. So did anyone come across how you get that in Next.js? So yeah, in their documentation here, they show you, hey, okay, you can make this page. It's like, so in this example, they're saying if you made like pages/blog/slug is the parameter name that they're choosing in this case. But in their example, you can see they're passing like A or B or C. Then the params will have this object slug A or slug B or slug C. So you can see like it's taking A, B, and C and making that the value of this making that the value, then the key is the name of whatever you put inside the square brackets here. Actually, this is for the front end. You go to the API reference. So it all kind of works pretty similar for API for front end and back end. Yeah, so here it is for the backend, and it works very similar. We have this request parameter that we get from our handler, and they just stick all the parameters, the route parameters and the query parameters inside this query thing. So we can get access to the parameters of the route from request.query. So to delete a particular item, we just need to pass our delete. Oh, that's funny. I called that menu item ID. We just need to pass this the ID. So we do request.query.id, and I'll go ahead and console log this so you can see it. Okay, so if we just look at pull up Postman here. So we made a few changes, but if we look at so we can remember we moved our cart.js API file to a folder called cart with index.js. So we just make sure that still works. So if we hit this endpoint, the get of API/cart, then we should be getting our cart still, which we can see we are. But then if we want to delete a particular item, so notice we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items in here. It's a lot more than 5. Yeah, 9 items in here. And we want to delete one of them, we can pass the ID of the one we want to delete. Now notice that a bunch of them have the same ID. So whenever we tell it to delete ID 1, it's going to delete all the ones that have ID 1. And then we'll just be left with ID 2. So to do that, we go to /API/cart and then / the ID of the item we want to delete. So let's delete ID 2. And if we just leave it as a GET request, notice we'll get this, hey, we only support delete requests for that endpoint. But then if we change it to delete and run that, then we get this successful 200 OK response. And then if we go back and just query our cart again, we still have 2 in there. So I think there's something wrong with the method that I wrote. Okay, so let's see what happens. So we got a successful response where it sent back the cart items to us, but it didn't seem to delete ID 2. So I need to kind of like debug this and figure out what's going on. So a lot of time to debug something, most of the time you're adding like console.logs typically to see like the flow of what's happening, so you can like look at what data you have as you're doing it. So we have this console log request.query. So we can kind of add a message to kind of look at that and see what's going on. So I updated that, and then we can make our delete request to delete that item and look at our endpoint. And so we can see request query here, ID 2. So we are getting the ID from the endpoint with 2 in it, right? So that's not the part that's broken. So we can go back to our endpoint. So we call db cart.delete and we pass it request.query.id. Okay, so this code is just incorrect. So we do db.cart.filter, which will then give us a cart item. And then we need to do cart item.id is not equal to the ID that we're passing in. Okay. And then we will update this endpoint to just give a message. Okay, so let's try it again. All right, so now we get this message cart item removed. And then if we go back and make our GET request here, it's still there.
Is this the same problem Brian was talking about when he was doing the delete method?
No, well, in the homework, I said to delete like all items, which the current method only supports deleting by ID. So it's slightly different, but yeah, you certainly would have ran into the same thing if you were trying to delete all of them. Okay, so let's look at. Sorry, this is just like my own code that's like made up code that's broken, so it's not really helpful for you guys to be learning, but oh. What a great bug. Okay, all right. So the issue here is okay. So the ID we're trying to delete is a number, right? So it's like ID 2, it's a number. And that's like that's like, and often, you know, in the database it'll be a number as well. But whenever we do something over like a URL parameter, it's going to be a string. So like request.query.id is 2, but it's the string 2. And so whenever we're like, the way that I wrote my code was, if you look at it here, you can see I'm doing this like db.cart.filter, and I'm doing this not triple equals. So, you know, number 2, not triple equals the string 2 isn't going to work. It's not going to filter out that item. So what we have to do, and this, you would have had to, you might have run into the same bug if you were dealing with a database as well, where you would need to take request.query.id, and then you'd want to do, and so you can turn a string into a number. There's a few different ways to do it, but here's one way where you call this like number constructor like this, and pass it the string that you want to convert to a number. So this will turn that string into 2. So if you look at like what that's like, if you pull up the console, for example, and you do like, if you pass the number the string 2, it'll turn it into an actual number. So you can see that's kind of what's happening here. So here I'm casting that ID to a number ID because that's what we expect. And then when I call db.cart.delete, we're going to pass it number ID instead of the string 2 or the string 3 or whatever ID we might pass to it. So, so now this should be working. So we'll call that, and then we can now call our cart again, and fingers crossed. Yeah, that ID is finally removed. And then we can empty the whole cart if we pass ID 1 and then do our GET request. And now we should have an empty cart in this case. If we go back to our page and refresh it, now it's empty. Okay, so I was hoping to get through more. Sorry about that bug. But there's a few other things we need to kind of learn. So like we see now that we can like we're pretty close to like being able to click that button and call delete to remove an item. But with the page, when you remove that item, the page right now isn't going to reflect that. It's not going to refresh and show you that that item's deleted. It's deleted in the database, but you did nothing in your code to like ask for the items in the cart again and then refresh the page to show those items. So that's kind of the last thing that I was hoping that we could get to so I could show you. And there's a bunch of different ways you can go about that. You can simply just like rerun the query to get everything again and just sort of like re-render the page, which is a fine way to do it. Or you can potentially like filter, like also filter the stuff out on the front end to remove the item that you deleted, which might be a little more efficient, but honestly, I would just sort of like refetch all the data. So you basically like trigger your query again to go get the cart items and then like refresh the page. Okay, so I will post some more homework. And then if you guys, I'll push up this code that you guys can look at, but if you're still stuck based off looking at this, make sure to post kind of your code and we can try and help you figure out what's going on. Okay, sorry we went over. See you all Saturday.
See you Saturday.
See you Saturday.